The Colours of Forgiveness. Episode 11. The past year of Lucy's life has turned everything upside down. First, she started seeing strange clouds of colours all over herself, which she worked out was somehow connected to her moods. But no one could help her, and her boyfriend Tom left, declaring her mad. Her mum was no longer with her, and even dear Tom's mum called Lucy to say she could no longer look after the cats, considering the situation, and they were now in a cattery awaiting her return. Lucy was still on the island of Iona, where she'd come to track down the only person she felt could help her, a mysterious old man called Fedel, who she'd met on the moor. He'd disappeared, but Lucy discovered an old island legend which said a healing hermit had lived once in the croft where Lucy'd seen him. Lucy was sure Fedel was the prince with a tragic past. All she knew was that he'd told her on their meeting to let go of her own tragic past and forgive, finally and completely. Following a creepy dream in which a nun with sad eyes suspiciously like Fedel's had melted a little of the glacier in Lucy's heart, Lucy was beginning to notice a fading in the colours, on her and on others. But Lucy knew there was a last thing she must do. Summer was coming to an end. Lucy was so happy here on Iona, but as the last golden days melted into the crispy mornings, sending her running for her beautiful bright green jumper knitted with the wool of the sheep in the fields, she knew she could not stay. Her cats were now in a cattery, something she'd never thought would happen. Hannah was going to half hours in the shop over the winter and wouldn't need her any more. And the book she'd begun as she first arrived was almost ready to offer to the publisher. This was the best book she'd ever written. It was on love and healing, and somewhere in there were threads of all she'd learned in her time here on the island. The islanders were warm and welcoming, not at all how folk portray small communities. They embraced her as a young woman come to mend a few things, and accepted her into their homes to share their tales and legends, especially once they realised she was a writer. Writing had always been more of a hobby for her, alongside her normal jobs, as Tom called them, but this summer it had become her salvation. Well, along with Hannah, she thought. They'd promised to keep in touch, and Hannah said she'd try and visit Lucy in the centre of England one day. See London at last. Lucy wasn't sure she would, but she knew they would keep in touch. And she would come back. A part of her belonged here now, since Fedel and Roy. She'd stumbled across Roy in a deep pebbled trough close to the shore. Nearly walking over him as she passed, he'd put up one hand in warning, a lone arm waving bravely on a long stretch of shingle. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disturb you," Lucy said. Roy sat up slowly, greasy hair matted on the back from sleep, black-rimmed fingernails and a toothless grin. Lucy stared. He smelt a bit too, but luckily the sea breeze carried his gently sour odour softly away, and then he spoke. "He said to look out for you." "Who?" said Lucy, but as the word left her lips, she knew what his reply would be. Fedel. A lurch in her stomach, like a car shifting into gear. It was the final piece in her human jigsaw. It was the only answer Roy could have given. "When?" was all she said. Roy smiled. "I like you," he said. "You understand, don't you?" And then Lucy saw the pain in his eyes. She wondered what had happened to him. It was hard to tell his age, but well into his 70s, she guessed, possibly more. "Yes," she said, "I do. Fedel said so too, and he's never wrong." "No," said Lucy, thinking how her colours were fading fast now. She'd listened to as much wise advice and folk online as she could. She'd spent hours finally telling her tragic story to Hannah, who would hold her as she sobbed. She walked miles in the evenings, communing with nature, as her mother might have called it. And she was learning to accept sometimes bad things just happen, even when we don't deserve them, even from those we thought we could trust. And that's okay. We're all working it out, some better than others. So she was learning to choose unconditional forgiveness, like Fedor's prince. Family will never let you down, Mum had said. But Lucy had learnt Mum was wrong, very wrong. Family could and would, but that was okay. Mum had done her best, and now Lucy would do hers. So she said goodbye to Roy and promised to bring him chocolate next time they met, at his request. And she walked as the shadows lengthened up the cliff path, straight over the top to Moorcroft. Climbing over the stile, she felt a sense of utter peace. And there, in the doorway, was Fedor. He'd lit an early evening fire, and just as before there was tea bread. Fedor, Lucy said, feeling the love inside her for this man she barely knew. Ah, Lucy, he said, in time for tea again, I see. And this time you're alone. And he smiled his beautiful smile as Lucy looked about her and realised the colours had finally gone.